continuation of my life story as presented to the secretaries for the CES. The Nazi influence even reached into our branch. Businesses and other establishments, to declare their loyalty to the government, exhibited signs Juden verboten, no Jews allowed. And so did our branch president. One of our members was a Jew. Now he could not join with us anymore to worship. I imagine that to many of the members this seemed a wise and necessary thing to do, but my father and my family's attitude was different. We regretted this cruelty ever so much. It is impossible to imagine how wise and necessary this declaration of loyalty was to the well-being of our branch. Our branch president had cultivated some sympathies for the Nazis, but not to the point that those who were opposed to the Nazis were in any way persecuted. In fact, like in our branch, during a time when religion was probably deemed un-German, it was going well. We walked as a family to Sunday school, about 45 minutes each way on Sunday morning. For sacrament meeting in the evening, my parents left us at home. This most normal and universally acceptable thing, this was the most normal and universally acceptable thing to do. And during the week, there was Relief Society, primary and mutual, young women and young men. Just as in general, the public opinion was divided in German as a whole, so of course it was in our branch. My father wrote poems, and as a quite not so outspoken anti-Nazi, I guess his poems nevertheless had an anti-Nazi flavor that really infuriated one of the members. He threatened to go to the Gestapo to see that my father would end up in a concentration camp. But it did not come to that. Instead, my father was drafted, which might have redeemed him in the eyes of his enemy. My father was over 40 at the time, and as the need for soldiers grew, men and boys were drafted between the ages of 15 and 50. On the other hand, some of our members were not as quiet as my father. During the years 1940 to 1943, with the war in full swing, all news was received and distorted by Nazi propaganda. In order to hear the truth, you had to be able to listen to British broadcast. For that, you had to have at least a radio, which we never had in our family. Only my grandmother did. It was a dangerous undertaking, but 3 young men in our branch, unwise and adventurous, not only listened, but typed the news on the branch typewriter. made as many copies as possible, and distributed them throughout the neighborhood telephone booth. They were caught. One lost his life. The other two were sent into the thick of the Russian front. Both survived, came to the US, and told their story. It was not really necessary to hear the truth about the war. We felt it in many ways as it happened to us. My father was gone, and my mother alone with us children. All food and other goods were rationed, and for quite a while we had already spent the majority of our nights in our makeshift shelter. Real, legitimate air raid shelters, bunkers, built out of heavy concrete, were not conveniently located in every neighborhood. We in our apartment building, which belonged to my grandmother, met in one of the apartments on the ground level. It had a long corridor and close to the middle of the building, with benches and chairs on both sides. That's where we spent countless nights. When the enemy Air Force attacked or just flew over Hamburg to another destination, sirens were sounded. That sound meant getting out of my warm and cozy bed, getting dressed in the dark into a pile of clothing I had carefully prepared the night before. It meant bombs and destruction, the possible loss of our homes, even injury and death. And so the sounds of the sirens were quite terrifying. It was a sound you felt fearfully throughout your whole body. But sitting warm and cozy again with my family and neighbors, we played games or dozed off and waited for the end of the air raid. Sirens could produce different sounds. The one signaling the end was a tone of relief. In the morning after such a night, my brother and I would often go up onto the roof of our 4-story apartment house and look for bomb shrapnels, to the distress of my grandmother. I guess she feared we would fall off the roof. My distress was always that my brother had bigger and better ones, and that his collection was greater than mine. These nightly interruptions did not do anything for our accomplishments at school, so my school evacuated its students and teachers to rural South Germany. I was fortunate. Higher education, after you turned 10, was costly in Germany. No way could my family have been able to afford it. I would have remained in normal public school until 14 and then found a job or an apprenticeship. Since my father was a member of the armed forces, the government paid for my higher education. I had the necessary grades to qualify. It was an all-girls school. This one school year in beautiful Bavaria, in Ettal near Oberammergau, and Garmisch-Partenkirchen seemed like one long vacation away from the war until we returned to Hamburg. Hamburg was one of the enemy's favorite targets. It was one of the largest cities in Germany, had much industry, and most importantly, a big harbor and many shipyards. It also was very conveniently located right across the channel from England and only a short distance for the British Air Force to attack. So I really had returned to war. The following year, 1943, my mother decided to take her children on a vacation to the Baltic Sea. My aunt had lost her home in Lübeck and had been evacuated to a place that used to be a very popular vacation spot when people could think of taking vacations. It was great for us, swimming and playing, sun and water, until one morning the sun came up, a small orange balloon in an endless gray sky. The enemy had bombed Hamburg for 3 days without interruption and destroyed it. They had used a lot of phosphor, and the sea of fire had transformed the whole sky into a sea of smoke. Now what? We had no idea what had happened to our home. My grandparents' house, our relatives, neighbors, and branch members. Unbeknownst to us, my father had been given a furlough to see his family. He traveled to Hamburg, hearing bits and pieces of information on his way home, and then seeing the full picture as he neared Hamburg. He walked to our part of town, our street, and then stood before his home, which did not exist anymore. The middle of the building, which housed the chimneys for all apartments, stood reaching up, a lone survivor. Attached on each level was a small corner of the kitchen floor with some of the stoves still standing. Communication by mail, we never had a telephone, was not the greatest. So my father did not know that we were away from Hamburg when it was destroyed, but he hoped that was the case. He traveled the 50 or so kilometers and found us all alive and well. What a miracle to be just on vacation those 3 days when my hometown died. Interruption for a minute.